This is DuPage Mayors and Managers Issues at Hand, a public affairs program discussing what's important in DuPage County.
Hello, I'm Amy Jacobson, and welcome to Issues at Hand. Joining me today are the president of the DuPage Mayors and Managers Conference and the mayor of Addison, Richard Veenstra, mayor of Naperville, Steve Cherico, and the mayor of Warrenville, David Brummel. Now, as we all know, state lawmakers are considering proposals to permanently freeze property taxes in Illinois. Let's face it, no one wants to pay more taxes, but there are serious implications for residents if Springfield were to pass a permanent property tax freeze. Let's begin with you, the mayor of Addison, Richard Veenstra. Why is the permanent property tax freeze problematic?
Well, Amy, the issue of taxation in Illinois is huge. And as you said, nobody wants to pay more taxes, but freezing local taxes, our property taxes, is not the answer. The ramifications for local governments, local taxing bodies is significant, and ultimately it is nothing to address the issues in Springfield.
What about you, Steve?
It's an enormously complex issue. I mean, you can't just freeze the property taxes locally without some sort of reforms to offset that. If that was done, the effects on our communities, the schools and the parks and the other governmental bodies who have no other form of revenue stream, they would just collapse. You know, we need to fix the structural problems first, and then we freeze the taxes. And you're right, everybody wants lower taxes, so.
Right. I mean, it's a pickle. I mean, you guys are in a jam because your constituents do not want to pay higher property taxes. But what about police, fire response if property taxes were frozen?
Well, of course, the situation for almost all of us, I think, is since 2008, we've had to pull in a lot of our resources and get down to our core responsibilities. We have done that responsibly. We live within our budgets. We do a good job with that, but there's not much fat left. So that if we're going to face more cuts, those cuts are going to be in essential services. Most of which would be, of course, with staff, important staff, public safety. Our budget in Warrenville, 75% of that budget is for staff and 75% of that budget is for police. So people have to understand that you have resources, you have responsibilities, we have things that we have to do according to statute. We have to do those things. If you cut the resources, we have to cut the service levels. And I think what most of us have reached a point in our communities, pulling in our budgets, we've now reached service levels that are acceptable to our community. Anything cut below that, now there's going to be pushback, there are going to be problems. And they're essential services. They're not things that are discretionary.
What about K through 12 education? Because most of the property taxes in DuPage County go toward education.
Well, that really is the crux of the issue. When you look at your property tax bill, 60 to 70% of that bill goes to support education. And the Illinois Constitution clearly states that the responsibility for education is the state's, but they essentially are subsidizing about 26% of the cost of education. The rest is being put on the shoulders of local municipalities and taxing bodies. That has to change before we look at property tax regression or any kind of freezes.
What do you think, Mr. Mayor Cherico?
You know, it's funny. At the federal level, when you make a change like this, it takes a while for it to trickle down to the residents. And the state level, a little bit quicker. But when you get to the local level and you make a change like this, the impact is immediate. You want to make parents, give them a lot of anxiety. You tell them that their children's schools aren't going to be funded. And it's a critical issue. It is so important to our communities that I think that if people understood that, they would really appreciate the ramifications of something like as enormous as a property tax freeze without structural reforms. So it's a big deal.
Do any of you have any ideas about any structural reforms that could be made in Springfield that could help your towns?
Certainly long-term pension obligations are a critical component of it.
So how are the pensions squeezing you?
Well, I mean, for Naperville, since 2011, our pension payment has increased by about $5 million a year. Oof. So you take that out of a $60 million operational budget, and that's a pretty big number.
What about
and it's
Warrenville?
going up.
Well, we're required to make, I think that the essential point here is we're required to make that pension payment, whatever it is. Everything else is secondary to making that pension payment.
So that comes first?
That comes first. It has to be made. There's no option out of that. The state determines what that is. We don't determine what it is, and that's the bennies and everything that the state has given away over the years. we're stuck on the hook to make those payments. Those payments keep escalating. It's a structural problem. It's one that is not going to go away unless it's addressed. And because we have to make those payments, we take that off the top of our budgets, and whatever's left we have for our operations and for whatever else we need. So as those payments increase, if our revenue doesn't increase or if our revenue is cut, that means a cut in services. And again, those are essential services at this point.
Wow. Excuse my ignorance, but I did not know that pension payments were the #1 priority.
Well, you know, and one of the problems is that when this was created, the pension payment system and the deal that was cut, it was all rear-end loaded. So 15, 20 years ago, very, very low payments, and it just keeps on ramping up. But we're heading into that top part of the ramp, and so the payment escalation is going to increase significantly, and that has become more and more impactful on the local, taxing bodies. And so, yeah, we have to pay that. That's an obligation. So we either fix that first, or we need to allow the property taxes to float so we can meet that obligation.
What about other government services such as garbage pickup? I mean, sounds crazy, but that's important.
Yeah, you stop picking up garbage and you watch how quickly you get calls from the residents.
Oh yeah.
And the pension issue, when you look at your property tax bill, the municipal government is responsible for about 6 to 7% of that bill. 8% goes to pensions. So the pension portion of your property tax bill is actually larger than the amount of money that goes to support municipal government.
Right.
So, and if you're looking at 6 to 7% for municipal government, 60 to 70% goes to education. There's a disparity there that really needs to be addressed. And when you freeze that critical funds for municipalities, 25% of our operating budget on an annual basis comes out of property taxes. So you put a freeze on that, the costs of providing services continue to go up.
And then
We'll look at reductions.
winter's coming up, and it may actually snow this year as opposed to the prior winters that we've had. So snow removal, road maintenance.
Right.
Again, these are our core services, and we're at a level right now where we can meet those obligations. You take away revenue, then we have to start finding ways to cut those obligations, still meet the obligations with lower service levels. And of course, that's very, very unpopular. And at, speaking in terms of the school obligations, people need to understand that, again, about 62% for Warrenville of our tax bill goes to the schools. Now, the schools don't have a lot of options in terms of revenue. At municipalities, we have a number of different ways that we can make up discrepancies. Schools don't have that. If you cut state aid, and schools are already struggling, they have a choice. Raise fees, find some money somewhere else, or cut some programs.
Oh yeah, bake sales can take care of that.
There you go. So yeah, that's the problem, is that people want very, very nice schools, and DuPage County, obviously, we're willing to pay for those schools. Our taxes are high in order to do that. That shouldn't be our obligation. That should be the state's obligation. If the state makes it more difficult to meet the obligations that the schools have to make, they have to somehow make ends meet. If they're going to have a balanced budget, they're going to have to cut programming, which try doing that at your school and see how popular you're going to be.
And it's not just the schools, it's our parks, it's the library system, and these are important things. These are important amenities to the community. I mean, you ask any resident who moves to Naperville, why'd you move there? Great schools, wonderful parks, safe neighborhoods. You freeze the property taxes and you put in jeopardy all three of those.
Have you noticed since property taxes have increased, have people been moving out of any of your towns, out of Warrenville or Naperville or Addison?
No.
Naperville has been growing, and I think all of our communities have been growing, so we're very fortunate in that respect. But look, we are well-managed, well-governed communities. Now, we have balanced budgets, we've been following the rules, and we've been doing what we're supposed to do. So shifting these costs and changing the rules is punishing success.
Yeah. And another impact that freezing the property tax has is that it affects our bond rating. And that's critical when we're looking at construction and development. Most municipalities rely on bonding to fund those projects. And if our rating goes down, the cost of those bonds goes up, the interest goes up, and it makes it much more expensive for us to do those projects. So projects either get canceled or become more expensive to the residents of our community.
So moving forward, what can you do? Can you meet with state lawmakers? Can you meet with the governor?
Again, it's a very complex situation because every decision that we make has a consequence, right? So I think there are solutions, but I think it has to start with some reforms. And we've talked about pension as being the #1 pressure point, I think, for all of us. And so,
But who can you reach to talk about pensions and pension reform?
well, it's certainly been one of DMMC's priorities, legislative priorities in the past, and remains so today.
Right.
You know,
The state legislators, those are the people that need to be addressed. And I think if I was going to leave any message for our constituents, I would say pay attention to this issue, because on the surface, it's very, very attractive. All of us are paying more than we want to pay. Is the solution that's being presented one that's going to work? Are there going to be too many negative consequences? And going forward, what's going to happen? Are we still going to be able to meet the obligations that we have going forward? So I would advise my friends and citizens, pay close attention, understand what's being proposed, will it work, will it meet the objective that it has, and even if it does, what are the negative things that are going to come out of that? Because there's certainly, as we've been discussing, there are going to be some places where there are pinch points where there's going to be difficulties for the communities.
Any other ideas to generate revenue in your communities?
locally?
Yeah, locally.
You know, I think the thing is that it's not a revenue problem right now. We're managing, we're balanced, our budgets are balanced, and so and we manage very conservatively.
Yeah, all three have, are mayors of very attractive towns in DuPage County. And, if you drive through your community, it's just,
But
you get jealous. You're like, oh, I want to live here, or I want to live in Warrenville, or I want to live in Addison.
They're
at
welcome
current-
in Warrenville.
At,
Oh,
at
thank
current,
you.
current levels, our revenue stream is fine, but keep in mind that the state just tagged all of our municipalities with our local government distributed fund,
Right.
10%
So it's so
of that.
strange. The irony here is that you have locally, on a local level, you have balanced budgets, but our state is not balanced, and it hasn't been balanced in decades.
Decades, yeah.
It's an irony that is not lost on us.
Yes, it is.
To Steve's point, Addison, we're experiencing a $500,000 reduction because of the new state budget and what it imposes on local municipalities.
They've trimmed our portion of the municipal portion of the income tax has been trimmed for all the municipalities. It's $900,000 for Naperville when you include the 2% administration fee that they've added onto the collection costs.
Now, what are the challenges for smaller towns than yours?
Well, we're all home rule, so we have other levers to pull if it becomes necessary to find revenues.
Oh, really?
But non-home rule communities, they're toast.
And I would imagine there are a lot of smaller communities in downstate that are very close to the edge, who depend heavily on their real estate taxes. If this is frozen, it might push them right over the edge. They either will have to reduce services, or in some cases they may stop giving services. They may stop having police force because they can't afford to do it anymore.
And that's when the county would have to take over then, right?
Someone would have to pick up the slack. So I guess that's another unintended negative consequence that has to be addressed, that if you want a certain level of service, it's going to take a certain amount of money. If you take that money away, there's going to be a price to be paid for that in terms of service level.
Back to Mayor Veentra's initial point, and that is freezing the property taxes without doing anything else does nothing to solve our problems, right? All it does is create, anxiety and chaos, really. There's no solution there. We have to have some sort of reforms to precede that in order to make that an effective strategy.
I think the other point would be that, again, this property tax freeze sounds very, very attractive. However, taxing is such a complex situation that people may find that after this is put in place, should it be put in place, so their taxes are still going to go up. There's no guarantee that the taxes are going to go down or remain the same. There are other issues that require tax raises. And maybe there would be carve-outs in the program that would allow certain, like public safety, to not be frozen, so their taxes still could go up for that reason. And then remember, too, that in most of our cases, about 3/4 of our budget is for staff. Staff is not a static expense. It goes up every year, because you have additional payments to make for pensions, and there are contracts to be honored. So that we do have, like a family, our expenses don't stay the same. In the municipalities, ours keep going up. Somehow, that has to be addressed in balance. So we've done a good job. My town has no debt. We don't have any debt against the general fund. We have good reserves, and we have a diversified revenue stream. That's what you're supposed to do.
You get an A+. Good
We
for
get
you.
an A+.
So what can taxpayers do? It's a call to action. What can we do?
I think one of the things that they should do initially is look at their tax bill.
Right.
And look at the different taxing agencies that are on that bill and decide what proportion is going to those agencies and what they're getting for their money.
Right.
And hold them accountable. I also think that they need to be talking to their legislators and saying, hey, we need change in Illinois. We need to fix the broken pieces, and a lot of that is in Springfield.
Mayor's right. Naperville, an average home, $400,000 home, say, is $800 municipal tax. Right? People look at their tax bill, and it might be a $10,000 bill. When they see that $800 is for their city services, they're a little surprised at that when they really look at it. It's still one of those things.
Looking at my property tax bill.
Yeah, right. The municipal portion of it is in our case, it's 10%, including the library. So it's a small portion of the overall bill. So, but the other services are critically important to make a community whole, right?
Yep. Well, thank you so much, Mayor Richard Venstra, Steve Cherico, and David Brummel. I appreciate your time. And you've been watching Issues at Hand. I'm Amy Jacobson.